Today I'm going to be getting back to the roots a little bit of this channel, and I'm actually going to be building a gaming PC. I know, crazy. And there's a few things I want to go over about my decisions and the parts before we actually get into it. First one being, back when I was making PCs more regularly, it was 2019 and 2020, kind of my winter hobby, and my whole ethos was I want to make the most cost-effective entry-level gaming PCs that I can make. But near the end of that time, I started making pretty mid to high range PCs, at the time with Radeon RX 5700s and 5700XTs, Ryzen 5 3600s, things like that. But I wanted to kind of get back to my roots and do a little bit more of a budget build and figure out exactly what's out there for budget PC cases. Unfortunately, I went a little bit off the rails, so this stuff's a little bit nicer than I would normally pick for a budget build, but the parts are still very inexpensive. So I started with a Vetroo brand case. Gamers Nexus actually covered about a year ago a Vetroo V5 CPU cooler, and it was a really affordable alternative to like the Fuma and the Noctua NHD 15, I believe. Unfortunately, I can't find cheap Montech cases with fans anymore, so I decided to spend $10 more and get one that has USB-C on the front panel, and it looked like it had magnetic metal panels. So I really am hoping that this is worth the price of admission. This case was $129, so honestly, pretty on the budget end for cases these days. Cases that used to cost $70 3-4 years ago are now $130. So still, I think this is a pretty budget-oriented case. For the power supply, same company. This was actually in the purchase frequently together section. But the main reason I chose this was ATX 3.0 ready. And what that means is this actually comes with a connector for the 12-pin GPUs. I'm not using a 12-pin GPU for this build, but it's very likely that this computer, since the bones are so good, will actually be upgraded to a newer GPU at some point. And I don't know how much power it's going to draw or what that connector will be. So I decided to get that out of the way and just go with a little bit nicer power supply. This has a 10-year warranty, which kind of blew me away. 80 plus gold, 1,000 watts, so you don't have to worry about it. This will be good. Set it and forget it. Still cheaper than like an EVGA or a Seasonic, and hopefully it provides us with some good efficiency. We'll see. But let me get these both unboxed and let's take a look and see what we're dealing with. They're definitely taking a packaging bag out of Be Quiet, Superflower, and EVGA's book. The power supply was in a little drawstring bag. It's a very small form factor. This is pretty short. It's extremely heavy, so I do actually believe the 1,000 watt rating, but look at that. PCIe 5.0. It's actually got two 12 pins with the Sense pins, which is awesome. It still has 3 8 pins, which is awesome. It looks like it has the Seasonic style motherboard ATX connector, and I'm guessing, oh okay, there they are, the dual 8-pin CPUs. So this is a well-featured power supply. It does have an eco switch, so I'm guessing this does have a fan stop mode as well. But honestly, that's looking pretty good so far. I'll get the rest of the cables unboxed once we take a closer look at the case, but let's get that unboxed next. So here we have the case unboxed. You'll notice that this is a little on the short side for a full ATX case, and that's correct. It actually doesn't put the power supply in a basement or up top. It puts it in the front, and I thought that was an interesting solution, and it let me buy a black power supply, which was a little cheaper, because I feel like it's going to be pretty well hidden in there. But you can see it's got a power cord pass through there, which runs all the way to the back of the case. We'll take a look at the sizing of the cabling there. Does have some really nice glass panels. I'll try to figure out how to get those open, but the thickness of the steel is about what you would expect for a $70 to $130 case. It's not as good as like $180 to $200, but it's not anywhere near as flimsy as the old $40, $50 Montech cases I used to build in. And again, anytime you see a USB-C connector on the front of a case, you know it's at least decent, because these cost, I think, $15 just for the manufacturer to put in. So anyway, let's get this open and take a closer look inside. So yes, there's a single thumb screw on the back of the top panel. you simply pull it backward, lift it off, and then you are able to lift both the glass and the metal panels off. And the front one very, very easily comes out with these little D&B clips right here, as you can see there. So that was pretty easy. Usually one of the first steps of building a PC is going to be putting in the motherboard, RAM, CPU, and then going with the power supply. So I'm not going to be any different today. We're going to start with that. Let me unhook this bag of built-in hardware, get the twist tie off the cables, and let's put in our motherboard. So for the build, I chose an Asus Prime B450M-A motherboard because I could find it on Marketplace cheaply with an I/O shield and a Wi-Fi adapter. For a CPU, I chose a Ryzen 5 1600AE because, again, cheap and available locally on Marketplace with a cooler, and these are actually still very good CPUs. Still Ryzen, still 6 cores, still 12 threads. You can overclock them a little bit with the stock cooler, but I'm probably going to leave it as is because once you see what I'm going for on the video card side, it's actually a pretty good pairing, and we shouldn't bottleneck too hard on either side. And for the RAM, I've got two 8GB modules of G.Skill Trident Z Neo 3600 CL18. The reason why I went with that RAM is it's gorgeous. It always looks good, and RGB adds FPS. And because I happen to have it actually, but I bought a 4-DIMM set of this from a coworker cheaply a couple of years ago, and I've been looking for a good home for it. So I'm actually going to start throwing in the screws to the motherboard. Then I'm going to bring these connectors over here for the 4-pin PWM fan, which is right here, and the RGB connector, which this motherboard does support. I'm going to throw them out the back and bring them in up top. Then we will put in our M.2 storage for our operating system. Then we will throw in the power supply. Then we will throw in the graphics card. Then we'll get everything nice and cable managed, and then we'll boot it up. So I have the cables up, and unfortunately, a sad realization, although this motherboard does have an RGB header, it is not an A RGB header. As you can see, there are 4 pins there, and this fan only supports the 3-pin variety. So we will let the fan run in its default RGB mode. I am also realizing that I made a point to get a case with a USB-C front header, and the board also doesn't support USB-C on the front header. So that's going to be a whoops from my part, but I'm going to go ahead and hook up the USB 3 Type A, which it does have. I'm going to hook up the front audio, which it does have. And I believe also it does have USB 2. No, it does not. No USB 2. But we'll hook that up on the front panel as well for the connections. And after that, I'll throw the power supply in, and we'll go get the GPU. Okay, since I'm dealing with a modular power supply, I'm going to go ahead and plug in all the connectors I need first, because the PSU is actually going to be mounted with the top here. I've already plugged in the what appears to be roughly 18 gauge power cord rated at 10 amps. So that cord is technically good for 1200 watts at 110, so you should be okay. I do wish it was a little bit thicker, but I do need to, I'm not going to be using the 5.0 today, but I'm going to need 2 8-pin PCIEs, the motherboard ATX 24-pin, and I need a single 8-pin EPS for the motherboard as well. We're going to be using M.2 storage, so I actually don't need any other cables, and that's where a modular power supply really comes in handy. I have to say, it's nice. This power supply came with, it looks like 8 Velcro ties, and then each one of the cables also has a Velcro tie. So we'll make sure to use all that for cable management, but here's our total cable requirement here. We've got a 24-pin ATX. We have an 8-pin single EPS here. It did come with 2 of these. And then I really love to see this, so I want to call them out for it. It came with 2 double 8-pin daisy chain PCI Express connectors, if you've got a card with like 3 connectors on it. Otherwise, it's always better to run separate 8 pins from your power supply straight to your graphics card. So I opted for 2 included non-daisy chain PCIe cables. Each one of these is rated for about 225 watts. So you'll be able to handle a really powerful GPU with these. I will say it only did come with 1 PCIe 5.0 connector, which is a little surprising and strange. But again, we're not using those today. It's a little awkward to feed this through, but it really isn't too bad. All right, we have the critical connectors installed. I'm going to quickly slap the M.2 boot drive in there, and then we will get going on installing the graphics card, which, drum roll please, is this bad boy. Now, the reason why I'm using this is because it's the only 5600 XT that I have, and I'm not suggesting you buy one of these because they're more than twice as much as a regular 5600 XT, but this is a Yeston Cute Pet AMD Radeon RX 5600 XT, 6 gig, and it's roughly on par with an RTX 2060 or 2060 Super, and these are like $100 right now, and you can find them everywhere, so I would really recommend one of these. It's like the same price as a 1660 Ti, but you get considerably better performance. So I'm still a huge fan of RDNA 1. I think it's aging really well and budget friendly. Not only that, but it gives you a great upgrade path. So does AM4, which is obviously the platform of this motherboard. This will support all the way up to the 5800X3D or the 5950X without any issue. So kind of baby steps and a good entryway, but a very upgradable PC, and that's always what I like to build. Okay, reasonably happy with that cable management, so I'm going to pop the side panel back on. We'll get the front panel reinstalled. We'll get the glass peeled, and we'll get the glass panel in the top put back on as well. That actually came out pretty nice, and you really can't tell at all that the power supply is black. And I'm a fan of the location in the front. All the cables are pretty well hidden, even with an MATX board. I ran the majority of the cables behind the actual motherboard, so you can't see very much. I love the fact that the power supply cables themselves are black. It comes with a really good variety of cables. The power wattage is more than enough for anything the system will ever use. It's got PCIe 5 connectors in the box for the next RTX 4000 card that this ends up using probably someday. The motherboard, like I said, is upgradable to a much newer, faster chip, which I may even do in a follow-up. But let's get it plugged in and booted, and let's see how the temperatures are. Well, first boot, right into Windows, no issues. Set the XMP, got everything ready to go, but we're gonna have 2 hours of Windows updates, I'm sure, so I don't know. It's kind of a clean little build. I like it. But again, these parts are just insane value, and I still think AM4 is the way to go right now because of the flexibility it offers you in upgrades. You could flash the BIOS in this motherboard and go to a 5950X, and you could put reasonably a 4080 or a 4090 or even a 7900 XTX in this system, and it would be just fine. That's just incredible to me. So, beauty of starting with good components where it matters, and cheaper, more cost-effective, but good value components where they don't. Well, I don't know how accurate a result that will be. I'm noticing that, unfortunately, one of the fans looks like it has a brushless motor controller failure, so that got up to 83 degrees Celsius. But overall, everything actually feels pretty good considering there's only one fan in this case. But I'm actually going to swap out now the 1600 for a 3900X. I just did the BIOS update as well before I ran that benchmark. You can pick these up for less than $200 with a cooler these days, and they are 12-core, 24-thread Zen 2 parts. They're awesome. So we're going to dump that in there, and then I'm also going to get an RX 6800 and throw it in this build as well, and we're going to run that benchmark again. And there you have it, the cheap upgradable PC with the upgrades. We have an RX 6800 non-XT reference, Navi 21 card, and we have a Ryzen 9 3900X with a Thermalright Assassin, all cheap parts. The CPU I paid $179 for, the cooler I paid $38 for a while ago. They're a little bit more now. And that GPU I snagged 2 months ago for $300. So really, this system, as it sits, is less than $1,000. Could you duplicate it for that? No, probably not, but you could definitely do it for like 12 or maybe 1300, and I genuinely don't think you're going to touch the performance or the value for something like that. I couldn't hear it the entire time. The temperatures only got up to, let's see what it says here. Only got up to 67 degrees on the GPU during a time spy run, and the CPU I'm sure is dead cold with that, so. No, this thing's pretty legit. I haven't built a PC for a while, but I'm pretty happy with this thing. And the case, honestly, looks great. So, I don't know. Another one in the bag.